The starting point is probably to understand why we currently don't do it, or why we are not successful, right, in creating jobs that people actually like. And the basic idea is to think about work as a product. And if you say, well, if work is a product, then the employees are the customers, right? What do customers actually want from this product? And obviously, people want compensation for their time, but that's not really, right, the entire story. We all know that, work satisfies other needs. And right, one of the things that work satisfied is, right, sense for people want to do something meaningful, right? They want to have autonomy in what they do, and they want to know how they're performing. And so to the extent that you can structure a job to deliver on those dimensions, right, that will make that job intrinsically motivating. The job is just worth doing for the sake of doing it.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow?
Today, we're going to talk about fixing work. What that merely means is a lot of the engagement around the employees and the employee experience is broken. And so, I wanted to bring on some authors here to help you see other perspectives other than just CEOs that are in the trenches, but, someone who's really done the work and the research around this. So we have Thomas Bertels. I might have butchered the last name, but incredible book around fixing work. And we talk about that. His co-author, we looked at as well. It really is an incredible book that when we looked through this, we were highlighting a couple of key elements. Why is work broken? What's really going on inside of how we design jobs, how we did work together? And it was really some interesting things behind it. One of them was, I asked him about meaningful work and how do you really define meaningful work for people? And I think you'll want to check that out. Another piece that was really interesting in this interview was the part where a lot of people are getting stuck. And where do they get stuck? Well, they get stuck in not sure what to do next. They might focus on low-hanging fruit, but actually he talks about there's a better way to look at it. So I'll let you kind of peek into the interview to figure out exactly what Thomas means by there's a better way. So we're talking with the author, Thomas Bertels, of Fixing Work. And my name is Gene Hammett. I am an executive coach. We do leadership development and cultural transformations with companies that are in growth mode. Most of our clients are on the Inc. 5000, and so they're dealing with a certain amount of chaos. They're very driven people, and they want to make sure that leadership is firing on all levels. And what I mean by that is, it's great to be a great leader at CEO level, but what about the executive team? Are they really leading their people? Are the directors, are the managers, your frontline people, are they leaders or are they followers? You want to make sure you have the appropriate amount of leadership across the company and in all levels, and that they're growing and evolving in their skills and their capacity and also their confidence. And that's what we do. If you're curious about the work we do, one of the first stops you can take is just a conversation, not with just me, but with other people that have been on the show before. We do a monthly conversation called an executive virtual conversation. You can go to coreelevation.com/virtual conversations and figure out exactly what is in there. We change the topic from month to month. And so if it resonates with you, sign up and you'll be able to participate with us and engage with us. If you would like to just go directly and send me an email because you're curious about the work we do, just go to gene@genehammett.com. And that's my spiel today. So here's the interview with Thomas. Hey, Thomas, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here on the podcast. We're going to dive in to talk about your book. Before we do that, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm a management consultant. I've been doing this now for, nearly 3 decades. I had a real job in the beginning. I used to work for a company called Azea Brown Boveri, where I got my first taste of transformation. But yeah, I've been consulting for close to 3 decades now. Started with a company called Aon Consulting in a division there, then co-founded a boutique with a number of former colleagues. And since 2021, I have my own shingle out there called Purpose Works.
Fantastic. And you've got a co-author behind this, which is a pretty interesting story. Tell us a little bit about your co-author of Fixing Work.
Yeah, my co-author, David Henkin, a longtime client friend of mine. We've known each other, for nearly 25 years now. And when I had this idea to talk about work design for a long time, and when I met with him 2 years ago, I shared with him what I was up to, and he said, that's really interesting. You should write a book about it. And I told him, well, I've written two. I'm not sure if I have a third one in me. And he was so kind and gracious to offer to write it with me. So we went on this adventure and actually finished the book.
Well, fantastic. As you know, I have a co-writer of my book is with my wife, which has its challenges in itself, but we are excited about that book launching soon. Back to your book, Fixing Work. Give us a quick summary of what the book is about.
So the book is a fable, like a parable. It tells the story of a typical middle manager in a typical company, in this case an insurance company, but it could be any kind of business, who faces, typical challenges that most managers face. You got too much work, you got unhappy customers, and you got employees that decide, to venture out to greener pastures. And so this leader, faced with all these challenges, through a chance encounter, really discovers like the secret to creating jobs that people like. And again, goes on this journey, implements some of these ideas, and after many trials and tribulations, is successful in the end.
Well, I love fables. They're so easy to read. I don't feel like they're as easy to write because you've got to write it in story format. But maybe you find your style works well. What's the difference between writing fable style versus sort of traditional nonfiction?
Well, traditional nonfiction, right? You typically have like a lot of case studies from clients in there, right? And it tends to be fairly dense. My experience with nonfiction books is that it's hard to get to the end, right? I mean, I typically give up so like chapter 3, chapter 4. Sometimes I make it to chapter 6, but it's really rare, and I love to read. But I think telling a story is a different animal. The hardest part is, I think, to weave all these different storylines together, right? Because you always have what happens to the hero, right? We're emotionally invested in them. Plus, you have the content that you deliver. So you got to weave that together. I had never written one before, but I found it really rewarding. And quite frankly, once you get into the groove of it, it was a lot of fun to finish.
Well, I think I'll do one at some point in time. But for now, let's talk about your work, Fixing Work. The question I typically ask every author is one that, because I know books are so hard. I've done this, so I actually live it in it right now. Why did you have to write this book, Fixing Work?
Well, for two reasons. One is in 1997 or 1998, I had a chance to read Goldrat's The Goal, which is like the first, I think, really business fable that made it big. And I was absolutely fascinated by it. It's one of my favorite books, one that I read right cover to cover, I think, more than once. So I liked that format, and I always wanted to write one of those. And then in 2004, I got introduced to this idea of work design. And that idea has stuck with me for the last 20 years. And so, again, finally, I was like, well, I want to write a story. This is, I think, a really interesting topic. And so I decided to leverage, the fable format to tell the story of how do you design work that people actually want to do.
Well, let's go into it. Break it down into some chunks that allow us to understand. So where would we start if we wanted to design work for a happy employee?
Yeah, I think the starting point is probably to understand why we currently don't do it, or why we are not successful, right, in creating jobs that people actually like. And the basic idea is to think about work as a product. And if you say, well, if work is a product, then the employees are the customers, right? What do customers actually want from this product? And obviously, people want compensation for their time, but that's not really, right, the entire story. We all know that, work satisfies other needs. And right, one of the things that work satisfied is, right, sense for people want to do something meaningful, right? They want to have autonomy in what they do, and they want to know how they're performing. And so to the extent that you can structure a job to deliver on those dimensions, right, that will make that job intrinsically motivating. The job is just worth doing for the sake of doing it. I think a simple example to look at is if you think about people who score high on those dimensions, right? They experience their work as meaningful, they have a lot of autonomy, they get feedback, right? One of the jobs that always pops up is teachers. Because as a teacher, you see, right, the students in your class grow and develop. You know what you're doing is really important. And I think that explains why people stay in that profession, although the pay is not great, right? But I think it delivers on what we want in meaningful work. When it comes to like the normal office environment, we actually don't factor those considerations in when we make decisions about what a job is, what people are allowed to do or not allowed to do. And so, again, the idea of fixing work is to bring some of these ideas and intentionally structure work so that people find it intrinsically motivating.
I really do love this idea. And I think that that we could do definitely a better job, and reading the book will probably help us. But for you to highlight, how do we actually create meaningful work? I know a lot of companies have people that are hourly, people that
Mm-hmm.
are, frontline doing monotonous kind of things. Spreadsheets sometimes isn't quite as meaningful. I know the work I do is very meaningful, but I've designed it myself. So I get to do that for myself and hopefully for my team. But what are you doing, or what should managers be doing to create meaningful work?
I mean, it's like the easiest starting point is, let's say we assume there's like a middle manager who's managing a function or a department, whether it's finance or HR or whatever it might be, right? I think the starting point is really to understand what's all the work that we're doing right now, right? What are all the job products that we have, like in my organization? And then think about how that work is actually being delivered. And oftentimes what we find is that, right, this work is very fragmented. As organizations grow, and I know that your podcast is about, right, growth businesses, but as you get towards like 125 people and beyond, right, that's where people oftentimes tend to, rightfully so, prioritize structure and process and really try to scale the work. But as we're doing that, we oftentimes tend to break work into smaller and smaller chunks, right? So the manager now gets like an analyst, and then the analyst gets like an assistant. So we break into smaller and smaller pieces. And what happens as we do that is we really a little bit suck the meaning out of the work, right? Instead of doing the entire job, now people just do a small piece. Somebody just do accounts receivables, somebody just does credit notes, and that's all they see. And the opportunity with fixing work is really to step back and say, how do we get somebody to do the entire job so that they have this sense of completion, right? Could somebody take the customer order and take it all the way to, right, shipping it out, for example? And the benefit of doing it that way is, one, people do the entire job, right? But also it allows an organization to scale much faster than if you break things into small bits and pieces. So if you now have a little bit more work, you constantly need to, right, fill all these positions, and you need to have all these supervisors and managers to coordinate what people do, right? So the idea of work design is a little bit to go back to the fundamentals and say, in the beginning, right, every entrepreneur does the entire job from start to finish. That obviously is not ideal, right? But how can we avoid the other extreme, that we break into such small pieces that people don't really have a sense of ownership and meaning in that work experience?
Thomas has been talking about creating meaningful work. I want to add two more elements that really will add to what he just said. One of them is growth. If the employee feels like they're growing, they're skill-based, they're learning things, they're more valuable, they're going to be more engaged and really love what they're doing. If they don't feel like they're growing, obviously they're not going to feel the same. So that really is important, to make sure that people are growing. The second part is, a lot of organizations will try to make it as clear as possible what we're here to do. And they make it too simple, and they focus on the wrong things. What I mean by this is they focus on the money, the numbers, and that may be what you're most interested in. But for your employees, go beyond the numbers. I remember one of my clients was stuck. They were in sales, and they talked about this project that they made $100,000 worth of revenue coming into the company. And that means they made about $1 million for the other company. And that's a really cool reason for doing it, is to make that company $1 million. But I asked them, beyond the numbers, what did they do with the $1 million? Well, they were able to invest in equipment, they were able to hire new people, and they were able to make some changes around the office. And so it felt really good to highlight it was more than just money. There was a story behind this that was beyond the money. And so you want to look for those elements, and that creates more meaning at work. Back to Thomas. I'm sitting here with Thomas talking about his latest book, Fixing Work. When you go beyond this initial phase of what's not working, what are the next things that we should be doing?
Well, I think in my experience, right, we are, in the work context, we are like people who buy a car and then we drive it until all the engine lights come on, right? We get ourselves into real big trouble, right? And oftentimes it's because people don't see some of the early signs. And so we double down on maybe some things that don't work. And so to get out of this, obviously you got to address some of the issues that, caused the engine light to come on, whether that's, right, issues with customers or productivity issues and so forth. But I think it's a mistake to stop there. I think the idea is really to say, as a manager, you should look at how work gets done and consciously and persistently really elevate the value of the work that your team is doing, right? So leveling it up constantly versus just fixing a problem and moving on to what people did before. And I think that's especially important for fast growing companies, because as you grow, you start to build out new capabilities, you go into new geographies, you open up new markets, you add new products to the mix. And so it's really easy to end up with like a lot of complexity as you make those scaling decisions. And so leaders, I think, need to be equipped to really constantly elevate the work product and redesign and rethink it. And so the book just offers a perspective on how to do that in a way that really takes the organization along, right? Makes the work pay off for the people who do it.
When you are looking at this and working with organizations, because I know that's the kind of the basis of where these ideas come from and the actual solutions, what are some of the areas where people really get tripped up? Some blind spots, if you will.
I think where people get tripped up is one, that they think they can do this by themselves, like in their own office, and draw these things out and then announce that there's like the new initiative or the solution that they want to roll out. And again, it's like then you might end up with this issue of change management, right? People might reject things that they didn't have a chance in shaping and getting involved in. So one mistake is that people do this by themselves rather than see it as a team sport and something that they got to do with their leadership team. I think the second mistake that people make is that they stop too early, right? They address some of the low-hanging fruit or some of the easy opportunities, and they don't really carry it all the way through and really create functions where decision-making gets pushed down in the organization and people really have more accountability and ownership. So sometimes you just end up building like a bigger, more complex machine rather than create something that's more scalable and actually allows you as a manager to be a little bit more future focused rather than making the present work.
Now, Thomas just mentioned, doing it yourself, and you may want to take some of this and do it yourself. And if you can, great. But what we've found, just like he's found, is it helps to have an outside perspective. Thomas is doing that for his clients, and I do it for my clients. If you feel like your leadership needs growth, you need to evolve your culture, or maybe there's something that you just can't put your finger on, come in and let's do an outside perspective. Let's really look at it. I have been doing this for over 10 years, and I know that I can add value to anyone's business. I sat down with an incredible client the other day who is got everything organized, and I would say they're the most organized, most put together, intentional client I know. And we sat down for an outside perspective on one element of their business. And I was able to break it down, and we came up with over 20 or 30 ideas. And we were able to nail that down to about 3 things that we would execute on that would really make the difference for their business, all because I had an outside perspective and I was able to add to that. And they just weren't just doing what they've always done. So outside perspectives, pretty important. Back to Thomas. That's an interesting perspective, because a lot of times we'll focus, and I've even said that, let's focus on the low-hanging fruit. But what I'm hearing you talk about, Thomas, is, in order to really have a transformational kind of impact within the organization, it's not just about fixing little things. It's about going to the core of it, which could be how we work together, how we design the work that we do, and how that impacts the culture, the people, the performance. When you are working with leaders, what do you have to keep reminding them over and over and over?
Well, you have to remind them that their experience or how they look at work is not what the average worker experiences, right? I mean, by the time that people are middle or senior management, it's been a while since they actually had to do the core job themselves. And so oftentimes, they're operating on a playbook that maybe is 5 or 10 years old. And so it's really important, I think, as people make those decisions, that they truly understand what the nature of the work is. And it's always eye-opening. I always have, you do these interviews, you ask employees, where are the pains, what are potential gains? You come back with these lists of your findings, and there's always a leader that says, I don't understand why people complain about this. That is not an issue. And then you say, well, why don't you go and sit next to Mary for half an hour and then come back and tell me if it's still not an issue. And they come back and say, oh my God, I had no idea how crazy the work was, right? People copy data from one spreadsheet to another because the systems are not connected, right? So I think it's really easy as a leader to lose sight of what's actually happening on the ground in the organization.
What is it we haven't talked about that you feel like is really important in your book, Fixing Work?
I think one of the things that we haven't talked about is probably the business case, right? Because I think there is, so people, I feel like oftentimes have this misconception that I could be nice to employees or I could be productive. And in my experience, right, there really is this opportunity for a triple win. You can make work more productive, you can make customers happier, and you can deliver a great employee experience and a motivating job. You don't have to trade one against the other. Right? Because the things that make an efficient process, right, not a whole lot of handoffs, right, the work just flows smoothly, is also something that customers want, right? When you call a call center, you want to talk to the person who can solve the problem, not talk to a succession of 9 people that all, right, know a little bit about, right, what could be going on here. And so again, this is like, people think there's a trade-off, but there is none. But it's really on the flip side, though, as you roll things out, you are well advised to really create solutions that have a payoff for everybody. If it's just good for the company, but it's horrible for the customer, it's horrible for the employees, it's probably going to be a tough sell.
Thomas, we've been having a great conversation about, your book, Fixing Work. I want to ask you, in order to make all this work, do you have one or two key principles of leadership that make this idea that you're trying to share with the world actually work in real life?
Yeah, I think one important thing is, I call it like the new 80-20 rule. And basically the idea is, if you're in an organization, right, you have these performance issues that you got to tackle, but everybody is already 110% utilized. Right? People are already running as fast as they can. So the issue always becomes, right, people have some ideas of how to fix this, but they just don't have the time to work on that and really roll that out, right? And so then people kind of kick the can down the road, or these things stretch out forever, right? It takes you 2 years to make some fairly minor changes. And in my experience, the trick is really to step back before you go on this big transformation and take a hard look at everything that happens in the organization and really systematically challenge all these activities and make sure that what you're working on, your work product, is still what's needed. And that's where you oftentimes find, right, especially in internal service organizations, like an analytics function or HR, right, where people have a lot of different activities that they do to support the business, that we oftentimes end up with like organizational debt, right? We end up with like things that we do that maybe are no longer needed, no longer efficient. And especially as the organization grows, it becomes harder and harder to get feedback, right? People crank out these reports and they send them out every week via email. And so it's really powerful for a leader to say, let's list all the things we do, let's rank them by value. You could start with the lowest value activities and then start talking to the customer and say, why do you actually need us to do this? What do you do with the outcome of our work product? And in my experience, you invariably find 20-25% of an organization's capacity can be freed up. And that gives you the fuel that you need in the tank to really fundamentally redesign work. Right? So the first principle is to really like tap into this and create capacity for your team. And the second principle is to never give that up. Right? So don't make the mistake to then load people up again to 100%, because this journey of like, right, elevating a function's value generation, that's a never ending race, right? You always got to level up. And so leaders got to have some discretionary capacity on the team to really imagine and build the future. And I think that's something that a lot of people might not pay enough attention to as they start this journey.
Just to highlight this, I just did a workshop with a few CEOs, and we talked about positioning your company to sell recently. And one moment in there beyond the financials is innovation. And what I'm hearing from you is give your people space. Don't just like have them work 110%, but give them a chance to actually improve things. And that will increase the engagement, increase their meaning at work, because they know they're adding value. And I really appreciate you highlighting that for us, Thomas. Thanks for being here and sharing your wisdom.
Oh, my pleasure. And just to the point that you made, the analogy that I use is nobody in the history of rental cars ever washed a rental car before they returned it. Never happened. Why? It's not your car, right?
Yeah.
But then when it comes to employees, we want them to improve the work, make it more productive, yada, 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 yada. But I think we oftentimes treat them as people that have like a short-term lease on the job. Right, and we're saying, that, right, this is your apartment, right? It's furnished, right? Don't touch anything. And I think we really got to rethink this, especially as we're doing more and more, as we're moving more and more into a knowledge era where we're not just paying for the hands, but we're paying for the gray matter between people's ears. And so how do we really empower people to achieve at the peak level rather than like squeeze the last, right, ounce of productivity out of them? And I think it's just a different way of managing.
Thomas, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Wow, another great interview. I love to be able to talk to authors who have really done the work and really trying to put out there the best product possible. Fixing Work is a great book that you can use if you want to make sure that people come to work happy, engaged, and really getting the most out of that experience. And you'll find that not only do they feel good about it, but they actually work better. They collaborate more, they trust more, and they will actually get more done, and it impacts the bottom line as well. So all that being said, thanks to Thomas for being here on the show, talking about his book, Fixing Work. We couldn't have the co-author on today, but maybe next time. When you think of leadership and you think of growth Think Tank. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.